G'day everyone and welcome to week number 6 here on our 2025 Chronological Bible-in-a-Year Reading Challenge. I'm so grateful that you are continuing on this journey with me, and I plead with you, let's keep going this week because we are up to one of the notoriously most difficult books in the Bible to read through. Many people, when they do a challenge like this and they say, yeah, I'm going to read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation or whatever it is, they hit the book of Leviticus and they don't get much further. Well, not us. We're going to persevere and we're going to get actually quite a lot out of the book this week, I trust, and into next week also as we read through Leviticus. And that's where we're up to. Basically, remember, we are camped here at Mt Sinai. I'm sure it wasn't quite as pretty as the background I've got here today, but anyway, camped at Mt Sinai around about a year, maybe 10 months or so, having come out of Egypt. And in that time, God is giving his people a new covenant, a new way to govern themselves, a new set of laws. And with that comes some very detailed instructions of how to operate the tent that they've just built. This tabernacle that Moses just got all these instructions about. They've built it at the end of Exodus and the glory of God's come down. What is to take place in that tabernacle? How are we to worship God in this new sanctuary? Well, that is what the book of Leviticus, or Leviticus, as I often mispronounce it, is all about. It's a book primarily for the Levites, okay, one of the 13 tribes of Israel, and their story as to how they as priests are to help God's people worship him and engage with him in this new system of worship. All right, so that's what we're going to be looking at this week as we read through the first 22 chapters. But a couple of things about what makes Leviticus notoriously so challenging and so difficult to read. The first thing is simply this. It's actually a very different book to what we have read thus far. As I've mentioned, and the title of this video is simply, it's a big bloody book, and I mean that literally, a big bloody book of rituals and rules. And that's what it is. It's a book of ritual. It's a book of rules. It's a book of instructions almost exclusively. There is very little, there's some this week, but very little narrative, very little story that sort of pushes the story forward. And that's what we've become very used to reading through Genesis and Exodus. We're reading a story. With this week, that kind of pauses as we open up an instruction manual, okay? That is primarily what we're reading, and that's often what makes it difficult for people. Just like we kind of struggled a little bit in our readings last week with the sanctuary and the repeated lists and details of how the tent or how the tabernacle was supposed to be built, Leviticus is almost exclusively like that. So just be prepared for that. And that's really all I can say. Just accept that. The Bible, remember, is a library. Okay, it's 66 books. It's a library of books. It's a collection of scrolls. And this, like all libraries, there are different genres. Well, the genre of Leviticus is it's an instruction manual. If you can go into it with that mindset, then you won't be disappointed. That's just what it is. Another one of the challenges that faces us when it comes to Leviticus is that it's very distant to us. This is so obvious this week that Leviticus is written in an entirely different time, a entirely different space, culture, and environment to what you and I are dealing with today. And so there's whole lists about what to do with mold and mildew and what to do with your slaves and dietary requirements and bodily discharges and how you're to avoid sacrificing to Moloch. I mean, my goodness, a lot of these things are so far removed from us culturally. And again, just a good thing to remind ourselves that what we are reading, okay, has a very specific audience in mind. God is speaking, Yahweh is speaking to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites at that tabernacle. What is this group of people in this time of history, for as long as this tent exists, certainly, what is this group of people supposed to know about how to worship in this time and space? All right, and it turns out that while it may be very distant to you and I, okay, much of Leviticus is actually very similar to many of the law codes of other cultures surrounding the Israelites at this point in history, all right, which is actually a really cool thing to know. Like God, while it's distant to us, God is reaching people where they are at. Okay, he is writing to the Israelites where they are at their point in human history. And so many of these laws are similar enough to the surrounding nations around them that they make sense to the Israelites. It may not make sense to you about mold and mildew and cutting one's beard and all this sort of strange, peculiar laws. It may seem distant to us, but it wasn't distant to them. These laws are very familiar in the cultural environment in which the Israelites found themselves 3,500 years ago. They're very similar, but they're also quite different. These laws are tailored in a way that are to distinguish them from the nations around them. Similar enough that they can relate to it, but different enough that they are to be separate or distinguished from the nations around them. And that's actually one of the main themes of the book of Leviticus. God's telling his people, listen, you already are a distinguished people. You already are different. I've brought you out of Egypt. I've called you to myself. You're in covenant with me. You're already different. You're already holy, okay? You're already set apart for a special use and purpose. But I want you to live in a way that demonstrates that distinction, that demonstrates that distinctiveness to the nations around you, okay? And so this is why this repeated theme comes out of the book of Leviticus. You'll see it this week in spades. I have made you holy. I have called you to myself. Now be holy, because that's who I am. Be like me. And so why do I say that? Well, a lot of these laws may seem distant to you and I. They're familiar to the people of the time, but they're also distinct enough, okay, to make us different to the nations around us. That's a very important thing for God's people as he preserves this people on into the future, okay? And with that distance of us reading these laws that are like 3,500 years old, they're so distant from us. The other challenge we often face is it is difficult to see the relevance of this book for us today. Okay, it's difficult to see as you're reading, what do I do with this? Okay, how do I apply this to my life? How the heck is this relevant to me? And particularly for those of you who grew up in a church environment where the preaching or the Bible teaching is very much, this is what God's word says, and therefore this is what you ought to do about it. Okay, this is what it says, this is therefore what you do. Where it's very application heavy, let's say, in the preaching. Many of us have been trained because of that history to read something in the Bible and to go, I've got to do something about this. I've got to find how this is relevant to my life. And I just want to encourage you specifically this week, hold your horses, okay? That's not how we're supposed to read the Bible. We're supposed to read it. Then we're supposed to ask ourselves, what does this mean? Not what does it mean to me? Okay, how does it matter to me in my 21st century life? No, what does it mean in history? Okay, and so here's one encouragement I really want to leave you with this week as you read the book of Leviticus, okay? I want you to ask yourself the question. I want you to discover, how can I discover him in this text? How can I discover him? And I'm saying that as a play on words. Him stands for this, the historical intended meaning. As I'm reading this, I'm to see him, the historical intended meaning of the text. Don't look at it and see, how do I fit into this story? No, not yet. This is a historical document. See him, the historical intended meaning, a 3,500-year-old rule book written to people at a mountain 3,500 years ago, similar to the nations around them, but distinct. That's the historical intended meaning. But of course, to discover him is also a play on words. How do I discover Jesus? Because we know, okay, on this side of the cross, here comes the autumn wind. On this side of the cross, we know that all these rules point to God, the need of God's people for a Savior. They point to Jesus, who fulfills each one of these pictures. Okay, because that's another one of the challenges of the book of Leviticus, is that it's also very depressing. Not only is it different, not only is it difficult, not only is it distant, okay, it's also a depressing book. I found it that way anyway, because it spends a lot of time highlighting sin. Yeah, the theme of Leviticus might be holy because I'm holy. A lot of people said that. You're set apart for a special purpose. But much of the content is focused on that which is unholy, on unholiness. And it's almost like, and we don't know this until Paul, the apostle, brings this up in the New Testament. The book of Leviticus, the law is given to God's people to help them, get this, to help them focus on sin, to help them become more sin conscious, okay? And that is really brought out in this book, that the people, as they went through these sacrifices, as they acknowledged their constant sinfulness, okay, they developed as a sin consciousness that affected everything from clothing to their house to bodily discharges and food and the whole lot, okay? This book helps them to see the power of sin in everyday life. which in turn is designed to help them appreciate the need of a priest to act on their behalf. A high priest who can solve the sin problem that is with us in almost every aspect of our lives. A sin problem that is so prevalent and preventing us from drawing near to God. We need a high priest to help us with this issue. Well, then again, here we find Jesus, don't we? On this side of the cross, we know we have Jesus as our great high priest. So yes, there is relevance for the book of Leviticus for us today. Yes, there is application of this book for us. Jesus is our application. But in the meantime, as you read through this book, seek to discover him. There's a historical intended meaning. And then as we look back, we see Jesus in the pages of Leviticus. Well, I hope that helps. Guys, enjoy at least the first 22 chapters of Leviticus this week. There's a reason I've put a break here for chapter 23. We'll talk about that next week. Enjoy your readings and I'll catch you next time. Bye.